Thank you for listening to this teaching from the prayer room. For more teachings, notes, downloads, or to subscribe to our podcast, as well as information about who we are and our upcoming events, visit our website at theprayerroomdfw.com.
You know, tonight as we go into the Book of Revelation study, session 24, the bowls of heaven, I think that this session, maybe more than most, and I would put this in a category, you know, maybe there's one or two that we've covered that have been like this, and there'll be another, I don't know, 5 or 10 that we'll cover in the coming sessions. But it's kind of a rare session in that we're covering content that has profound impact on the future for the church, about what we believe about these verses, what we think about these ideas is going to have a significant impact in the future. And I think at just a general, introduction, thinking about their bowls in heaven, that doesn't sound so exciting. It doesn't maybe sound like that's, so what? That's kind of like, how's that a big deal? But when we start to look at what these bowls do and how they impact the future, my hope is that we'll actually walk away with a very different perspective. And so I think this is a profound importance for the future in a way that is pretty surprising to us. And so we'll just jump in. So the first, we're doing a study tonight on bowls, literal bowls, that are in heaven. And there's a lot of them. And they actually have a lot of impact. It's a pretty significant theme in the book of Revelation. In this series that we're doing, or this study, our objective is to look at themes, and hopefully major themes of the book of Revelation. Well, these bowls, if you just did a little, Bible Gateway search on the word bowls in heaven, I didn't count them out, but there's probably, 45 or something references, maybe 40 references to bowls. There's so many, because this is a pretty significant issue. So we're going to talk about heaven's fine china tonight. The bowls that are in heaven that have profound purpose, that are precious to the Father, that are well known in the heavenly scene in the courtroom. In our homes, you all got bowls in your cabinet probably, and there's some of them that are just collecting dust. There's some of them maybe up on a shelf that you never see. These bowls are up front and center in heaven. These are not collecting dust somewhere, unknown by any of the visitors that walk through the living room of heaven. These bowls are pronounced loudly. These bowls are obvious and have great meaning and depth. Point I want to make here is that they are governmental in their purpose. They're in the throne room. There's nothing accidental or unimportant in the throne room of heaven. These bowls that we're going to look at, they're in that room. The room that we looked at, some weeks ago, that's got the lightning and the thunder and the rumblings and the 4 living creatures and all the glory. That's where these bowls are, that room. That room is the governmental center of the universe. That's where God runs the entire created order. He runs it from that room, and in that room there are bowls. That's just such an interesting idea. These are not cereal bowls. These have very specific purpose. These are again, I'm using that kind of tongue-in-cheek, that the fine china of heaven, the most prestigious, most important, most carefully crafted bowls that are in heaven serving specific purpose in the throne room, in the governmental center. We're going to look at 2 particular types of bowls, and I'll kind of throw in a bonus bowl a little bit later. We're going to look at 2 types of bowls that are serving in this governmental purpose of God releasing his purposes on the earth from heaven through bowls. That's just such an interesting idea. But we've got 2 different types. First, we've got Revelation 5:8, and we're going to look at Revelation 5:8 and Revelation 15:7. We're going to see those same 2 verses 7 or 8 times in this session. The 24 elders fell down before the Lamb, and each one had a harp and were holding golden bowls full of incense. So the first type, golden bowls filled with incense. Second type, Revelation 15:7, one of the four living creatures gave to the seven angels 7 golden bowls filled with the wrath of God. So the second set of bowls are those that are filled with the wrath of God. So you've got bowls in heaven before the throne that are filled with incense, and you've got bowls that are filled with wrath. So intense. Man, it might have been easier if Captain Crunch was in those bowls, because this is intense here. Now, I want to tell you that I don't claim to have much clarity on this, and I'm not excited about that, because I think this is a subject that is going to have growing relevance to the church, relevance to the church as we move closer to the second coming. I think we are going to grow in our understanding, and we're going to need understanding about how the church interacts with and relates to these bowls filled with incense and these bowls that are filled with wrath, because there are profound future moments, future events related to these governmental bowls that are before the throne. And they have everything to do with the church on the earth and how we interact with those bowls. They're a real part of our future. So today, honestly, it's just an introduction. I think that in the future, we're going to be very grateful that we had this session. And there'll be some that won't hear it tonight. They'll hear it, online, or they'll, listen to the recording later. I think that we're going to be grateful we were introduced to these bowls, because you don't get level 2 and level 10 clarity until you started off with level 0 and got an introduction. So all we're going to do tonight is just introduce these important bowls and kind of hopefully leave a mark that we go, there are bowls in heaven that I don't really understand, but they're important and they're filled with some interesting stuff, and the church relates to those bowls in an interesting way. And I think that will begin for us a journey that I am confident in the coming decades will grow in clarity, and we're going to need that clarity. Now, if you're in the notes here, I'm on page 2. Top of page 2, I'm going to go kind of quickly through this second section, this Roman numeral 2. It's bowls shadowing the heavenly reality. What do I mean by that? We're going to rather quickly look at the bowls that were in the temple, because the bowls that were in the temple were just a shadow of these bowls that are in heaven. They're just a shadow of the purposes of the Lord related to bowls connected to worship, bowls connected to God's purposes, bowls connected to intercession, connected to cleansing, bowls that are the release of God's purposes. So we're going to look kind of quickly, just so that you have a little bit of a frame of reference, that before we had Revelation 4 and 5, we had, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, 1st and 2nd Chronicles. We had chapters in the scripture that were revealing to us how God felt about bowls, because God himself was the one that prescribed the use of bowls in worship, the use of bowls in the tabernacle, and then later in the temple. And so we're going to just look at these real quick, because some of them, when you start to put them all together, you realize the subject of bowls and worship of God it's a bigger deal than you'd think. When you start to look at how big these bowls were, how many of these bowls there were, where all these bowls were, it's kind of like a loud statement from heaven. So let's just look real quick. The sacred bowls, also known as the sprinkling bowls, these were filled with the blood of the sacrifices. So the animals, when they were sacrificed, their blood was put in these bowls, and the priests would then take blood from these bowls and sprinkle that blood on the altar as if to cover the altar. It was a point of atonement. Okay, these animals, they died, and now their blood was being sprinkled, and that sprinkling of blood was an act of intercession to cover over the sins of the people. And the blood was held in bowls. That's so intense. Okay, so there's a bunch of them. Well, next, the bronze sea, and I didn't put these in any particular order. The bronze sea is the biggest bowl you've ever seen. It is enormous. It's about 15 feet across, maybe about 10 feet high, or maybe not quite that high, maybe like 8 feet high. But you could hold 18,000 gallons of water in this bowl. Now, this bowl was ornate. I mean, so decorative, so attention-grabbing. And it was put right outside the temple so that if you approached the temple, you probably didn't get too far before you were staring at this ginormous bowl. Okay? It was an attention getter. This bowl was up front and center in front of the temple. And I would encourage you, if you can't quite picture it, go look it up on, Google something. Look it up in your Bible concordance or the little drawings in the back or whatever that's called. And get a picture of this. This was, when you approached the temple, you could not help but be struck by this enormous bowl that was right there in front of the temple. And its purpose wasn't for holding blood, it was for holding water. This was where the priests would wash their hands. Now you just think about, like, how big of a bowl do you need for a priest to, like, wash his hands? I mean, you'd think, like, the sink would work, right? God's prescription was for this thing to hold 18,000 gallons of water for the priests to wash their hands in, so that the water to blood ratio was, pretty offset. I mean, you got a lot of water. This was the cleansing, the hands of the priests. This was like to cleanse their hands so that they could do the work, okay? This is huge. Then you had bronze basins. These could each hold 240 gallons, and they were about 6 feet across. So now imagine, what 6 feet is, so from me to the first chair there, something like that. It's about 6 feet. 6 feet round. And these were filled with water, but these, unlike the blood bowls and unlike the water bowl, these were the in-between. These basins were used to wash the sacrifices. So after you got the sacrifice, you got all the blood out of it, or most of it, then you'd take that sacrifice, you put it in this basin, and you'd clean it off to get the rest of the blood off of it. Okay, so these were kind of the in-between size bowls, but these things were enormous. And there were 10 of them. And these are also outside of the temple. So you kind of picturing this, like you walk up and you've got these sprinkling bowls, that are filled with blood, and they're, reasonably sized. Then you've got these 6 feet across bowls that are made for washing the sacrifices, and there's 10 of them, and they're pretty big. Then you've got this enormous bowl that's kind of the center point, and it holds 180,000 gallons of water. I mean, if you walked up to the temple, you were struck with bowls. There are bowls everywhere. Well, that's not all. Then you go inside the temple. And inside the temple, there's more gold basins and more sprinkling bowls. This time they're made of gold instead of bronze. Outside the temple, bronze. Inside the temple, gold. Outside the temple, ginormous. Inside the temple, smaller. These were where the priests would then perform the sacrifices in the temple. And they were using, smaller utensils, smaller space in there because you're actually now inside of a room. But you've got all the same stuff that was reflected outside. You've now got it inside the temple. So you got additional bowls. And I gave you some verses there that talk about this. Then you also have the lampstands. Now these lampstands, there were 10 of them. These 10 lampstands were inside of the temple, and they kept it light in there. They were torches, if you will. But torches in this context didn't look like a torch that you and I would think, where you put a bunch of kerosene on the end of something, big cotton swab or something, and then you dip it, and got the kerosene all over it and light it. It's not like that. These torches were actually giant bowls on a stand, and the bowl would hold oil, and then there were little wicks that went down into the bowl in order for the little lamps, the candles, if you will, that were part of these particular lampstands, they would dip into the base of the oil, and that way they had plenty of oil. So you got these bowls of oil on top of lampstands now inside the temple. Bowls, bowls, bowls everywhere. Then you also had these two what are described as bowl-shaped capitals. You approach the temple, and it says, this was done for King Solomon in the temple of the Lord. The two giant pillars outside the temple. So if you approach the temple, there were two major pillars, but it says that what was on top of the pillars were two bowl-shaped capitals on top of the pillars. Now, these weren't actually bowls, but they looked like bowls, and they were bowl-shaped, and I think part of that picture was to announce all the louder the importance of the bowls related to the approaching of God through this worship sanctuary. You've got these two giant pillars, and they captivate you. But on top of them, instead of it just being, just a seal or, the roof resting right on top of the pillars, there were these giant bowls on top of the pillars. Now, my point with all this is just to say the temple worship had bowls as a major theme. And I think that the reason that God set it up that way is because God knew long before we did that bowls are important to the orchestration of God's government through worship. Bowls have specific importance in God's kingdom, and specifically in the running of his government, the execution of it. Now, let's move on. That's your backdrop. Part 3, let's talk about the function of these heavenly bowls, because we got some crazy stuff going on here, okay? First, they are filled by human activity. Now we're talking about the bowls in heaven, okay? So move away from the Old Testament, the temple. We're not there anymore. Now we are up in heaven, and we're looking at the bowls that are filled with incense and the bowls that are filled with wrath, okay? The bowls of heaven are filled by the activity of men on the earth. That's how you fill a bowl in heaven. Human activity. What we find here is there is a direct relationship to the things that people do and don't do on the earth that then has representation in bowls before the throne in heaven. Pretty powerful. This is an intriguing concept because it means that what we do down here matters and has impact and impacts God's government and plays into God's government. Part B, the mysterious content of these bowls. One attribute that makes these bowls pretty different than any bowl we've got on the earth is the substance that's found in the bowls is supernatural. It isn't Cheerios, it isn't marbles, it isn't tactile, it isn't sand, it isn't grain. What's in the bowl is supernatural. And yet it can be measured. It's got volume. What is in these bowls is measurable, has substance to it, and yet it is mysterious. These bowls are filled with things not commonly known to have capacity or volume. These bowls are filled with prayers and wrath. Every bowl I've ever known that had anything in it, I could move the spoon around and pick the stuff up. These bowls, if you look into these bowls, there is actual substance and volume. We can tell because they get full. But what's in there isn't grain, it's prayers and wrath. That's what's in these bowls. Gave you the verses again. Golden bowls full of incense. 7 golden bowls filled with the wrath of God. So intense. Now, I just throw it in there because it seems to me to be in the same line of thinking. This concept of containers for eternal rewards. And the reason I bring that up is Jesus, more than anybody, but even in the book of Revelation, Jesus talks about the concept of earning rewards and heaping them up, gathering them, acquiring them, like they go into a container for you of some sort. He says, it's done according to your deeds. Revelation 2:23, this is Jesus. I will repay each of you according to your deeds. Revelation 22:12, my reward is with me, and I'll give to each person according to what they've done. Now, if we can learn anything from the bowls that we just looked at, we can see that the activity of man on the earth fills bowls in heaven with commonly thought of intangible substance. But in heaven, it has tangible volume to it. Wrath, prayers, and I'm even going to say eternal rewards, because we see that these rewards are heaped up for us in heaven. And if that's an idea that you're not really connected with, that's okay. I just wanted to point out that I think that there are other things other than just wrath and prayer that have weight and volume in heaven that can be measured in a bowl or a container or a bucket or a room or whatever, that there are things in heaven which have substance, which on earth we don't see that, we don't equate it that way. okay? So I think it's actually conveying to us a principle rather than the only two things in heaven that fit this criteria are wrath and prayer, okay? I think there's others. All right, let's move on. An intriguing way that these bowls are filled, it's through partnership. Partnership either in a good sense or in a bad sense. How about partnership with the bowl? Okay? If it's a bowl of prayer, you partner with that bowl by praying. If it's a bowl of wrath, you partner with that bowl by sinning. Pretty intense. And both of these bowls, both of these types of bowls, get filled. And when they get filled, dramatic things occur. When they're not full, it's still building up to the point of filling. But when they get full, they tip, and dramatic things occur. And it's a little bit more complex than they just tip, because it doesn't happen just arbitrarily. It happens in accordance to the purposes of the Lord, but it happens in accordance to their being filled. Look at this, Revelation 8:3, we see what happens when bowls are filled. And again, these passages that we're looking at are primarily the governmental side of what's happening up there. But I think that the principle also would work in our own lives. I think that, if you pray and pray and pray, I think you probably are filling some sort of bowl in heaven. And that when you filled that bowl, the thing gets tipped. But what we're looking at here is governmental, global, end-time purposes. But I think that the pattern could probably be similarly seen in our individual life. But here we see bowls in heaven filled with the prayers of the saints, being now offered on the altar, Revelation 8:3. He was given much incense to offer with the prayers of all of God's people on the golden altar in front of the throne. Now, just so you know, these prayers that are being offered, the prayers of the saints, they've reached a certain point of now it's time, it's fullness. All the prayers have come in, if you will, okay? And what happens here, I didn't give you the full, passage because it requires a little bit of explanation. But in Revelation chapter 8, this is when the trumpets start to get sounded, the end-time trumpets. The end-time trumpets don't happen accidentally. They happen because the prayers of the saints have filled up a bowl, and now it's time to dump that bowl on the altar. And what now is released are the trumpet judgments at the end of the age. So the activity of man, or the activity of heaven, is being released in accordance to the activity of mankind. The prayers of the saints. Well, I also gave you another verse here out of Romans chapter 2, where not just the incense bowls are filled up this way, and that there's dramatic impact when these bowls are filled, but there's dramatic impact when the bowls of wrath are filled. Look at this. This is Paul now in Romans chapter 2. But because of your stubbornness and your unrepentant heart, you are storing up wrath against yourself for the day of God's wrath, when his righteous judgment will be revealed. This isn't an unrelated idea to the bowls of wrath in Revelation. This is Paul referencing the bowls of wrath in the book of Revelation. This is Paul talking about those bowls of wrath. Okay, just think about if they're called a bowl of marble, then marbles, not like it's made of marble, but a bowl of marbles, you're expecting that what goes inside that bowl is marbles, right? And that when it's full, now you got no more room, the marble bowl's full. Same concept, but wrath. These are bowls of wrath. Nothing else goes in these bowls. What goes in these bowls is wrath. And that wrath is stored up by unrepentant hearts and unrighteousness. And it's stored up for what is described as the day of God's wrath. It's when the bowls of wrath are poured out. Okay? Dynamic things occur when these bowls get full. Okay? Let's look at the description of their appearance, because these are pretty crazy bowls. First, both bowls are made of gold. Now, I think that that's actually descriptive of how God sees the bowls. I think you and I see these bowls very black and white. I think we like bowls of incense, and we don't like bowls of judgment. We don't like bowls of wrath. And I think God goes, yeah, well, those are just china on two different, shelves in my china cabinet. I mean, they're both made of gold. Those are the bowls of incense, and those are the bowls of wrath. I mean, both of these things are important to me. I made both of them out of pure gold. Both of them are before me in my throne room. And so I don't differentiate the way that you guys do and assign them as good bowls and bad bowls. I assign them as bowls of government, of which I am accomplishing the whole counsel of my purposes. And they are both made of pure gold, both of them. And so while they might look different, I would just imagine if you're holding a bowl of wrath, it probably, I'm just guessing, has some measure of inscription or appearance to it or decoration. Something would probably tell you it's a bowl of wrath as opposed to it's a bowl of incense. I'm just guessing. But both of them are made of gold. Look at the numbers of these bowls. We've got 24 bowls filled with incense, and we've got 7 bowls of wrath. Now, before we get too excited about that, because there is a little bit of a balance here, I'll look at it here in a minute, but there's good reason to believe the bowls of incense are pretty small, and the bowls of wrath are probably ginormous. Okay? And I'll give you a little bit on that in a minute, but just looking at it, you got 24 of these bowls of incense, 7 bowls of wrath. This number 24, it represents the double fullness of man. So you go, what the heck? What does that even mean? There were 12 tribes of Israel, and that was God's orchestration of government. He had 12 tribes. And then in the New Testament, he had 12 apostles of the Lamb, and those 12 apostles were his messengers offering mercy to the planet, offering the way into his kingdom, the way into the knowledge of God. These 12 men were representatives of Christ. You got the 12 tribes of Israel. They were representatives of the government of God on the earth, the 12 tribes of Israel. So the fact that there's this 24 is in many ways representing both of those numbers together, and both of them equaled fullness. Then you've got 7. Well, 7 also means fullness. But there's no cute games going on here. This is 7 simplistically. This is just one group of 7. This is 7 in its perfect completion of God's wrath. You got the 7 days of creation. You got the 7 days in the week. You know, God's the one that came up with how many days there are in the week. That wasn't some person's idea. It was God's. And he's the one that set up the sun and everything else right where it is to make those things happen. 7 equals completion and then reset. Okay? Well, you've got 7 bowls of wrath that equal the completion of his wrath and reset. And man, when those bowls are all poured out, we do get a reset called the millennial reign of Jesus. Okay? So you've got 24 and 7. I just find it profound that there's 24 of these bowls, again, all golden bowls, all before the throne. There's 24 of them that, in a sense, represent mercy because it's the intercession of the saints. Of course, the saints are also the ones that intercede for the bowls to then come forth. So it's not a total mercy package, but you got these 24 bowls that are being filled with the prayers of the saints for the purposes of God on the earth. These 2 sets of bowls will carry the scales of history. You've got 24 on this side and 7 on this side, and both of them are related to the purposes of God and his government and his execution of his final purposes for this generation. And they're all connected. And it's the interaction of humanity, the wickedness of man going up and being stored tangibly in the form of some sort of wrath that's measurable in these bowls. And also the purposes of God, and come Lord Jesus, and Lord send out the harvesters, and Lord release unity in the church. All the stuff Jesus told us to pray for is all going up into these incense bowls as well. Those that hold these bowls, you've got 24 of the elders, and you've got 7 of the what are described as like the primary angels before the throne. We're going to spend a whole session, it's actually next session, talking about these 7 angels, because these 7 angels show up over and over in the book of Revelation. So next session is all about these 7 angels, so it kind of affords me to not have to say much about them right now. What I will say is, you've got the 24 elders around the throne. When you think elders, think like the elders at the city gate in the Old Testament, okay? You've got the city being run by elders, by leadership. They're counselors. They're the wise men, the wise leaders of heaven that are giving counsel in the heavenly court These are the 24 that hold the prayers of the saints. Then you've got the 7 primary angels of heaven, and they're over the 7 bowls of God's wrath. You've got like the heaviest hitters of heaven carrying the responsibility of holding these bowls and doing stuff with them. They don't just have the bowl to have them and now I'm the bowl guy. They have them because they are messengers with specific time and understanding and wisdom and legislation to pour those bowls out and do something with them. Next, they are the caretakers of our prayers. That's what these elders are. And then the angels are the executors of God's judgment. It's pretty intense. I'm going to give you this last part here, and then we'll break into discussion groups. The size of these bowls, just to give you a little bit of perspective. I want to do the best I can to help us see what's happening in Revelation. And so some of this is just kind of nerd details, but I think it's helpful to awaken our imagination to see things as they are. And unless we spend a little bit of time looking at details, none of that really computes. All right? Bowls of incense. Each one had a harp, and they were holding golden bowls full of incense, which are the prayers of God's people. Now, I want you to imagine these elders, okay? There's 24 of them, but just pick one. These elders have got a harp in one hand, okay? And that harp is for playing. So that harp isn't like 3 inches tall. That harp is big enough to play. In the other hand, they're holding a bowl, which means that bowl is not 90 feet tall. That bowl is a hand bowl. Okay, that bowl they're holding. It says they're holding bowls, holding golden bowls. But they're not double-handed holding, because in one hand they got a harp. So they're single hand holding a bowl. I'm just trying to give you a picture of how big these bowls are. These bowls are however big you hold in one hand bowls. All right? Maybe these elders are big, but I don't think we have any reason to make them big, because I think they're humans. I think that they're the humans of history that are given specific eternal privilege to be before the throne. So I think that these are meant. I think the description of them makes it very clear. They're wearing crowns very similar to the ones that saints are promised if we walk in accordance to a certain measure of light during this age. I think these are humans. So you've got 5'8" tall humans holding a harp in one hand and holding a bowl in the other, okay? The bowls of wrath, however, are different, as are these 7 angels. These are the 7 archangels before the Lord. There's good reason to think that they're big. I mean, we're talking about Michael and Gabriel, okay? These are 7 really big angels. And one thing that we know about these bowls are so big that when these bowls are poured out, massive global things happen to the whole planet. Go pour out the 7 bowls of God's wrath on the earth. Now, I just don't imagine, this is just me, that I'm going to pour out a bowl that's 8 inches across, and I'm going to pour that out on the earth. Oh yeah, by the way, there's only 7 of these, and these 7 equal the 100% completion and totality of all of God's wrath. All of God's wrath from all of history. These bowls are much bigger than 6 inches across. When these bowls are poured out, they're poured out on the earth. These are big bowls. The first angel poured out his bowl on the land. The second angel poured out his bowl on the sea. What kind of bowl do you pour out on the sea that then turns the sea to blood? I mean, these are not small bowls, okay? Third angel poured out his bowl on the rivers and the springs of water. It's one bowl, but it's poured out on the rivers and the springs. Fourth angel poured out his bowl on the sun. What kind of bowl are you pouring out on the sun that makes any difference to the sun unless that bowl is big? These are big bowls versus little bowls. The purposes are different. All right, so now let's break up into groups. All right, so we're going to go ahead and do our time of Q&A here. And what I'll do is I'll repeat the questions just so that those that are watching online or who will hear the message later can hear the question as well. And so, Caitlin, if we can, why don't we start with you? So 7 questions. Let's see if I can. Okay, so the question more or less was, bowls of wrath, bad, what? And what do we do with them? When do they happen? How do they fill? Where will the church be? When do they occur in the end time kind of timeline? So the bowls of wrath are the third series of judgments that occur. The first are the 7 seals. Jesus opens those in chapter 6. Then there are the 7 trumpets. Those begin to be blown by the 7 angels in chapter 8. And then there are the 7 bowls of wrath, which are poured out by the 7 angels. And that begins in chapter 16, or 15 if you want. So in the chronology of events, when does this occur? Well, the specifics of when the bowls begin to be poured out is they happen after the trumpets are over. Why does that matter? Because Jesus comes back at the last trumpet. Jesus comes back at the 7th trumpet. There are 7 trumpets. When the last trumpet is sounded, Jesus returns. It's at that point that the church is raptured. But we're not raptured and go away to heaven. We're raptured and caught up with Jesus in the clouds, in the sky. Jesus is coming to the earth. So we're not raptured and go to heaven immediately. We're raptured and now we're with Jesus, who is gathering up a giant army to come down here and kick butt and take names. So now, with resurrected bodies, we're with Jesus in the sky, coming to judge the earth with Jesus. It's while this is occurring that the earth isn't just going to get the armies of heaven. The earth is also, at this point, now going to start in a rapid succession, going to start getting the bowls of wrath poured out on it. So at this point, every believer in Jesus has a resurrected body, and no bowl could hurt you even if it was poured out right in your eyeball. But they won't be. They'll be poured out in specific and strategic places in the earth where Jesus is not going to get hurt by bowls. Neither are his people that are right there with him in an army, that are coming with him in the clouds and that then are on the earth and accomplishing different purposes. So the bowls of wrath are bowls of wrath against people that hate God, not bowls of wrath against the church. One of the things that is a common mistake is that we think that if God releases a plague, a judgment, something bad on the earth, we think, oh, wow, that means the believers are going to be impacted by that as well. But God knows how to save the godly out of the midst of wrath and judgment. He's done it time and time and time again. Just think about the rebellion of Korah. Okay? If you guys don't know that story, God very carefully made a specific amount of dirt open up like a mouth and eat a group of people. And everybody else was fine. Only the people who were supposed to die that day got eaten by the earth mouth. Okay? God knows how to pick out the guys and gals that he wants in the mouth of the plague. Same thing with judgments, same thing with the Exodus. Think about all the people that were judged in the Exodus. Not one of God's people were hurt. And it's the same judgments in the book of Revelation that happened in the book of Exodus. So we do not want to look at the judgments in the book of Revelation and think, oh my gosh, it's going to be so bad. Instead, we want to go, oh wow, the miracle-working God will be working overtime to protect the righteous while judging the wicked who lives right next door. That's the overtone, really, of the end-time judgments, is God protecting his people and using them to accomplish gospel purposes while bringing judgment to the wicked. So great question. Let's now go to Andy, if we can get your question.
So this is also about the wrath, the bowls of wrath. More about, like, so it's described as, or the way that it was kind of presented is like, whenever sin occurs in the actions of men, then this bowl is kind of filled up. But it's called the bowl of God's wrath. So is that something that, like, God feels the wrath, the anger of that sin, or at that sin, and then it's like, he doesn't want to feel it anymore, and then he puts it in a bowl, or it's like being stored up for the day of judgment, or kind of talk about that.
I'll do my best to reiterate the question. the related to God's emotions, these are called the bowls of God's wrath. So when sin occurs, how does it turn into wrath, or what's happening there? I'll give you just a simple little kind of catchy thought process, okay? Prayers turn into incense. Sin turns into wrath, okay? So in these bowl concepts, it says that the prayers, or that the bowls are filled with incense, which are the prayers of the saints. So when the saints pray on the earth, it goes up and somehow turns into incense and now shows up in a bowl. When men sin on the earth, it somehow goes up and turns into wrath in a bowl. So it was sin became wrath, prayers became incense. You guys kind of tracking with that? And so, God is in his, he's the one that created this whole system. So it's not like he showed up in heaven one day and there was a system that he was somehow subjected to. Oh my goodness, I can't believe I now have wrath. Oh, I get it because people sin. I mean, this system was created by God. And so in his perfect orchestration, he understood that the right answer is patience, and then eventually full justice, full judgment. I put the verse in there. In fact, it's probably worth reading if I can find it pretty quickly. That we have this wrong idea about how God views sin and how God views the waiting patiently to bring about judgment. If anybody can find that before I do. What did you say? Thank you. Bottom of page 6. The Lord is not slow in keeping his promise, as some understand slowness. Instead, he is patient with you, not wanting anyone to perish, but everyone to come to repentance. But the day of the Lord will come like a thief. And the heavens will disappear with a roar, and the elements will be destroyed by fire, and the earth and everything in it will be laid bare. I want us to see the connection point here. God understands that for perfect justice to be met, wrath must be poured out in its fullness to fully answer sin, iniquity, wickedness, injustice, every evil thing that's occurred. It must happen. But this is now Peter kind of like answering his accusers as though they were like arguing with him. He's saying, but the way that we typically see things, and he kind of points the finger, he goes, the way that you typically see things is you see a bad thing happen and God doesn't immediately judge it. Therefore, God must not be a God of justice. Wrong. He's patient. That will be judged. 100%. It's called the completion of wrath. The fullness of the wrath of God is being stored up, but it's being delayed for a moment. Think about God actually like being able to accomplish the greatest amount of good, also being able to make the most point of exclamation. We're going to live for billions and trillions of years. If God judged a little every time, or if God held out and waited and held up all the judgment, held up all the wrath until the end, and then released what could only be described as the fullness of the wrath of God, think about what giant exclamation mark that makes in history forever about how God feels about sin, about how God feels about wickedness and justice. But in the meantime, you and I were once objects of his wrath. Aren't we glad that he didn't deal with us with the level of wrath that he's going to when these bowls get poured out? In his kindness, in his patience, he is waiting. So as some call it slowness, it's actually God's patience. But don't mistake patience for a God who will never judge or a God who will never bring wrath. That's incorrect. He will bring about the fullness of his wrath in his timing. It's called the day of his wrath, the day of the Lord. So, and last question.
Yeah, so a little bit of a two-part question related to timing of the bowls of incense being poured out, as well as like what that looks like. So in Revelation 8, like right before the trumpets are released, the judgments from that, it says that there's an angel that's holding a golden censer, full of incense with the prayers of the saints.
Yeah. Rather than rephrase that question, I'm just going to talk because it was layered. So, first, the bowls of incense and the bowls of wrath are not a perfectly balanced, like there's 7 bowls and they're released at the time period of the bowls of wrath, and there's 24 bowls of incense and they're released at the time of incense. There's not the time of incense. There is the time of God's wrath. Those bowls of incense are perpetually before the throne. The 7 bowls of wrath are in one moment given to the 7 angels. So there is a moment where those bowls, they've been filling up with wrath, presumably somewhere within line of sight of the throne, but it doesn't say that. But there's some place where these bowls of wrath are right now, and they're filling with wrath. But they're not given to the 7 angels until a specific moment in the future, at which point they pour them out. In fact, these 7 angels, one moment before that, were holding trumpets. So they didn't have bowls in their hands, they had trumpets in their hands. Okay? So the bowls of wrath are given to the 7 angels to pour out the 7 bowls of wrath in a very monumentous point in human history, in eternity, in the end time drama, in the end time storyline. The 24 elders around the throne hold these bowls all day, all year, all month. I mean, they're holding them perpetually because they are the place where the representation of our prayer appears before the throne. Okay? So these 24 elders are sitting down in 24 chairs that are surrounding the throne. And when you pray, your prayers show up in those bowls somehow. Exactly, we don't know. Does does America go into that bowl? And we don't know. We don't know how it all measures out. Or do certain prayers, like that's the elder of something prayer, and that's the elder. We don't know. We do know that when your prayers are prayed, they show up with representation before the throne, and that these 24 elders, they are all about falling down before the Lord, laying their crowns down. They're all about playing those harps. I would assume that these bowls are not stagnant, that these bowls are being released even now, and that these bowls probably far more represent moments that occur all throughout human history and not just at the end of the age, though there is a specific representation that we see in Revelation chapter 8, the passage that you're referring to, that's now saying there is this fullness of the prayers of the saints. It doesn't say fullness, I'm just throwing that word in there. But the prayers of the saints, and I think that what's being described here in Revelation chapter 8 is actually specific prayers related to the release of the trumpet judgments. Because that's what happens when these prayers are poured out on the altar, the trumpets begin to sound. So I think what's being described here in Revelation chapter 8 is one prayer initiative of which the saints on the earth have been sowing into, and they've been, again, this is part of the, why does the church need to understand this stuff? I think there's going to be coming a time when the church, with real energy, is going to be praying, God release the trumpets. Because you say you're going to in your Bible, and we're getting close to that moment, God release the trumpets. Besides, Jesus doesn't come back till we get to the last trumpet, so God, we want our Jesus back. God release the trumpets. So I think that what's happening here in Revelation chapter 8, I'm sure there's many facets to it, but one of the things that's occurring is the answer to specific prayers, which then unfolds in the 7 trumpets being sounded. So, yeah. Absolutely. As the church, right now, we do not yet understand our identity really at all. As the bride of Christ, as sons and daughters. I mean, there's so much about our identity we don't understand. But when Jesus comes back, he comes back to a fully mature bride, which means between now and that moment, we will mature. And mature people do stuff immature people don't. Mature people understand things immature people don't. The mature body of Christ, as we grow up into our identity and our calling, we will be partnering with who God is, what God wants, what God's doing, how we're supposed to pray, how God's going to release things on the earth in a far more mature capacity than we currently are. So yes, absolutely.
This concludes this teaching from the prayer room. For more resources or to schedule another TPR teacher to come speak at your church or event, please see our website at theprayerroomdfw.com. Thank you.